cell phone doesn't always switch over. That's what happened to us this morning. Swift cell phone still read 5 a.m. Here it is 6 a.m. So we'll see how many people get here. The lobby after this clock back and forth. And I think go from spring in the back okay. Well, hopefully you're 18 to 30 years this afternoon. Not dinner, lunch. Play the ball. And just have some good time together. You're looking at Genesis chapter 2. I'll have you open up your Bibles to that part there. Genesis chapter 2, verse 4 through, I think, 17 today. Okay, so today is our 4th installment of this root series called Digging Deep through Genesis 1 through 3. And I don't know about you, but I have been really nourished, really helped, really benefited through these topics that we've been going through. The first week we talked about the power of God. Second week we talked about the Word of God. We talked about the image of God. And then this last week we talked about the rest of God. And tell you what, these topics have really, I don't know about you all, but when I put together these sermons, man, I am the primary recipient of these truths, and they've really helped me out a lot. So why are we talking about these types of things? They're very foundational things, right? Don't we get this when we're early in our faith? Shouldn't this already be a part of our foundation? Well, and two, why are we calling this the Root Series? Well, if you think about it, about a week and a half from now, we have the first day of spring, right? And in spring, we've got lots of flowers, all kinds of flowers. Here in about another 2 weeks, we're going to go out as a family out to Washington, D.C. And we're going to take in all the sights out there, but there's the cherry blossoms. And we're really looking forward to seeing the whole city in bloom. I love springtime because of all the flowers, but you can't have good flowers without good roots, right? Good roots. And so being that we have just replanted our church, new location, new name, and we want to see flowers, right? We want this place to bloom with fruit, buds, blossoms, flowers, fruit, right? In order for that to happen, we're going to spend some time on the roots. Because as you know, when you transplant a tree, you got to take care of that root ball, right? And you got to swaddle that thing properly. You got to adequately give it water, and then you can replant it in a new location. And then, if that root ball is intact, whoa, you're flourishing. We want this church to flourish, right? So we're going to spend some time on the root ball, okay? And so we're going to take our time here through these foundational topics and really get back down to the root of things. And think about these topics. The power of God. Okay, that was the first week. The power of God. He spoke the worlds into existence. He can do anything. He can bring something out of nothing. He can bring order to chaos. He can do that. Then next week we talked about the Word of God, and that's how he does what he does. He doesn't do anything without the power of his Word, so we're going to really hold on to this and proclaim this and speak this and read this and pray this. We're going to build. Okay, we're going to plant. We're going to do good root work in the Word of God. So we talked about the power of God, the Word of God, and the image of God. That's how we do ministry. We take care of people as if they were created in the divine image. And guess what? They are. So we're going to learn how to take care of people well. And then we talked about the rest of God. And this helps us understand a healthy rhythm and pace. We're not going to work our fingers to the bone, trying to replant a church. We're going to find a rhythm. And then when we were last week, six steps, and then a stop. 6 days of work, and then you take a day of rest. You recuperate, you rejuvenate, you refresh. It's called pacing yourself. Okay? And And then today we're going to talk about now the work of God. Okay? Talked about rest last week. Now we're going to talk about work this week. The work of God. And it's interesting how these topics kind of fit together. Work, today's topic, is really rooted in last week's topic, rest. Right? Adam and Eve, the first day of their existence, was a day of rest. God created them on the sixth day. He took the seventh day as a rest, and Adam and Eve rested with him, with God, and rose to do new work, a brand new person. So we're renewed and refreshed when we rest. So that's really rooted in rest. And when rest is rooted in the image of God, because God is a resting God. Why do we rest? Because God rested. So rest is rooted in image, and image is rooted in word. We are who we are because God says we are who we are. And then the word is rooted in, God himself, the person of God. So these topics really flower out of each other. So today we're going to be talking about this concept of work. In the beginning, there was work. Think about that. Not as a consequence of the fall. No, this was pre-fall. Work was a part of paradise. It wasn't a necessary evil. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't a part of the curse. It's a part of our DNA. We are hardwired to work because God spent a whole week of working creative in man. We entered into his rest, and we rise to join him in the work because he is a working God. So it's basic to our human existence just as it's basic to God's existence. Jesus said in John chapter 5, he says, the Father is always working, and I'm always working. God is on the move. He's always doing something, and we want to be in on that work along with him. 6 days of creation, 1 day of rest. We have this constant cycle of work and rest. Work and rest. 6 steps and a stop. 6 days of work and then a day of rest. And in that ratio, 6 steps and a stop. Not like, 1 step, 6 stops, or even 3 steps, 4 stops. No. 6 days of work. 1 day of rest. That's probably the adequate ratio. So God has given us something to do in life. Back in Genesis chapter 1, he says, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. This is the creation mandate. This is why you're here, to be productive. So what does that look like? How do we honor our God-given design? So how many people here love their job? Huh? How many people maybe just tolerate their job? Okay. How many people here hate their job? We got some honest folks here. When I graduated college, we're here today to talk about work, but specifically, we're going to narrow in on this whole concept of having a job. It's kind of abstract to talk about work, kind of a cool concept. Yeah, of course, that's good, but what about your job? I had a job when I got out of college that I just really hated. I was working for a dentist office, and I was hired on to be their sterilizer, a person who broke down the rooms and set them back up. So I would take all the instruments, all the dental instruments, and I would go back into the back room and I would sterilize them. And I would get all the rooms set back up. I'd wipe everything down, and that was just my job. And I looked into other areas. I was able to do some teeth cleaning and x-rays and all those types of things too, some dental assisting type things, And you walk into dental offices typically, and they seem very peaceful, don't they? I always had this conception of a dental office being just this, it was the most chaotic job I had ever had. Because here I am, I'm supposed to set up the rooms, tear them down, bring them back, clean them up, set it back up, and then what would happen is I would take the instruments, I would put them in the sterilizer, and the sterilizer would have a test that you would run on it, and the test was beginning to fail. So the main assistant would come in and ask me, why is this failing? I don't know. Show me what you're doing. So I would show her what I was doing. He says, oh, you're putting way too many instruments in that sterilizer. That's why it's failing. Don't overload the sterilizer. Okay. I'm not going to overload the sterilizer. So I would still have all the rooms to clean, and I wouldn't put as much in the sterilizer. And so I'd have a big heap of instruments there ready to be cleaned. And then they would get to a certain critical part of a procedure where they would need the polishing disc or the slow speed, and I wouldn't have it on the tray. And everything's on timing there. And so if they didn't have a certain thing, oh my word, I would hear it. The assistant would come in, why don't we have this? And she would see the big pile of instruments. I'm like, I'm doing what you told me to do. You have got to make sure you have things in that room. And I'm telling you, that was tense. And they weren't always nice about it. And so here I am going to work, hating this job. And after a while, I figured out how to do it right. And after about 2 years, I got pretty good at this job. But let me tell you, it wasn't fun. I got hired on next to a university job, working for a veterinarian clinic with an amazing benefits. It was one of the really sought-out jobs in town. On the first application, I submitted it, and the reason why they hired me is because I had at least 2 years in a medical or dental clinic. And so I'm saying even a job that you hate can serve you well if you learn to love your job. I don't think God ever takes you to the next level, really, until you learn to appreciate the level where you're at. So today we're going to talk about learning to love your job. We're talking about work as a big concept, but what does that look like in your situation? All of us, or most of us, have jobs. Even if you're retired, you have tasks and duties that you see to. How do you learn to love it? I think this passage speaks to those ideas very clearly. So we're gonna in order to do this, we got to accept 3 things. Okay, you got to embrace 3 things. In order to love your job, you got to embrace your purpose. Then you got to embrace your place. Then you got to embrace your provision. So we're going to work through these one at a time, but first let's get into Genesis chapter 2. I'm going to read you the first verse here, chapter 2, verse 4. It says this, "These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created in the day that the Lord God made the heavens and the earth." Now, if you take note of the first words here of chapter 4, verse 4, it says, these are the generations. Now we're starting to get really into the structure of the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis is really arranged around these words here, this phrase, these are the generations. So this is a repeating phrase all the way through Genesis. So these are the generations of the heavens and the earth. Then we got these are the generations of Adam. These are the generations of Noah. These are the generations of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, all the way through to these are the generations of Jacob. And I love this word generations, don't you? Kind of catchy? Maybe church after it, maybe? Generations? Generations is just another way of saying histories or origins. Okay? Genesis is the book of origins. And anytime you want to explore the question, why? Why am I here? Why do I have this job? Why do I have to work? There is no better way to explore the reason for work than to look at its origin. So today we're going to be looking at the origin of work, and it's going to help us appreciate the why of the what. Last week and the weeks preceding, we talked about the what. Okay? Today we're going to talk about the why. So in chapter 2, we launch into this new material, but like I said, it's not really new. It's a flashback of chapter 1. It's a second and more detailed account of chapter 1. It elaborates. The author here really brings out his magnifying glass and helps us take a closer look at the reason for our existence. So why am I stuck on this job? Why am I stuck here? I don't know if you've ever asked that question. I have. Many jobs. And let me answer this question from the Word of God, and I believe it's this. You were put there for a special purpose. You were put there on the job that you have right now for a special purpose. Let me read to you verses 5 through 7. When no bush of the field was yet in the land, and no small plant of the field had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain on the land, and there was no man to work the ground. And a mist was going up from the land and watering the whole face of the ground. Then the Lord God formed the man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature. The man was created for a purpose. And do you see what it is? Verse 5 says, there's no man to work the ground. And so God brought together the dust and breathed into him the breath of life. It's amazing. We are matter and spirit, held in integrity. We're dust and divine breath. That's who we are. But our purpose, did you get it? Was to work the ground. That's it. That's my purpose. That's the purpose of man's existence. We're put on this earth to work the ground. And to this notion, we have several major objections. Number one, we think that's menial. We think that is below us, beneath our dignity to work the ground, manual labor. We have these classes of society, the educated classes, the white-collar classes. We want to aspire, but to go and just work the ground for all my life? Please. But what would God look like if he came into the world? I think he'd probably look like a carpenter. I think in the Old Testament, if God came into the world, he'd look like a gardener. This is what he did. We're going to read about how God planted a garden. This is what God does. And all work, I believe, causes us to reflect the image of God, because God is a working God. He rolls up his sleeve. Jesus became a carpenter. He is King Jesus. Read Daniel chapter 10. He receives worship from all peoples, nations, and languages. And so he comes to the earth to preside in royal courts of marble over the affairs of mankind. But no, he's locked up in some obscure shop in Nazareth, working and whittling and shaving down wood and making tables and chairs. Menial work. And yet, this is who God is. So when we take our job, we can know that we are looking a lot like God, no matter the work that we do. So that's the first objection. We think it's menial. The second objection, I think, is we think it's pointless. Working the ground, there's never an end. There's never like a finish point. It's like when you wash your car. Can it just be washed? When you mow your lawn, can it just be mowed? You have to keep doing it. It's never done. That's called maintenance. It's maintenance. I got receipts to run and papers to grade and dishes to do and forgery to lawn. Forgery to lawn. How did I get that? My mind. Forgery to lawn. Laundry to fold. I do that sometimes. That was amazing. Wow, the brain. I got cars to maintain. This is called working the ground, maintaining life, right? And what happens when you don't? Do things stay the same? No. Things get worse. And one time, I think I've told you before, but we lived in a place up in Washougal that had all kinds of blackberries. And one season, I decided not to mow them. And they literally took over the yard. I mean, they were like blowing in the wind. If you do nothing, things get worse. So in order to beautify and to keep things nice, you got to work the ground. You got to maintain life. And if you don't do it, you know, the ground gets hard, gets dry and arid, there's thistles, there's thorns, and if you do nothing, things do not stay the same. There's nothing more destructible than the power of neglect. If you neglect a friendship, if you neglect your relationship with the Lord, all these require maintenance. This is the whole concept of working the ground. It's the metaphor for maintaining life, and this is why God has placed you here. So working the ground, well, it's pointless, it's menial. I think the third thing is, we would say is, we think it's a necessary evil. Mark Twain called work a necessary evil. I got to do it just to pay the bills, but once I get to this certain point, man, no more of that. No, this is basic to the existence of life. Work has inherent goodness. It doesn't have utilitarian goodness. You don't do it for functional goodness. It's because it has its own sense of goodness. It's a part of bearing the divine image. This is who God is, and this is who He made you to be, a worker of the ground. So the fourth one here, I think, is we think it's unattractive. We think the workplace isn't very exciting. Who would want to work here? You know? We walk into a place, it's like, I don't want to take that job. This place is dreary. Yeah, it probably is dreary. But you know, you were put there to make it bloom. If you look at this here in the first verses, we look at a landscape that is very dreary. And out of the ground, out of the ground, God made to spring up every tree that is pleasant for food. And there is, where am I at here? No, I'm too far down here. Yeah, there is no plant. There is no bush. There is no rain. And God needed a cultivator. So when He's placed you on your job, you can go into that situation thinking, oh man, this place doesn't have a lot to offer. Or you can think, man, I have something to give. I can make this place. I'm here to make it bloom. I know it's a dreary place. Demetrius, Adam, I know. That's exactly why I put you there, is to make it bloom. We're here to make things flourish. You know, I had a friend of mine, his name is Dave. He moved into a place that was kind of sketchy, didn't look very nice, you know, but he was outside always just fussing. Just doing stuff in the yard. And over the span of the next couple of years, he literally beautified that place until it was gorgeous. We see this happen to neighborhoods where people go into a neighborhood and just renovate a neighborhood. And it's just like, you know, the property values increase. It's attractive. People want to go there. But it didn't start that way. So sometimes God puts us into a context where, yeah, there's not a lot to offer you, but you have a lot to offer it. You're there to make it bloom. You're there to work the ground and to be faithful where God put you. You are there for a special purpose, so embrace the purpose, and it's to make it beautiful. You're there to make it bloom. So why am I stuck on this job? You were put there for a special purpose, and you were put there in a specific place. Look at verses 8 through 15. It says here, and the Lord God planted a garden in Eden, in the east, and there he put the man whom he had formed, and out of the ground the Lord God made to spring up every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. A river flowed out of Eden to water the garden, and there it divided and became 4 rivers. The name of the first is the Pishon. It is the one that flowed around the whole land of Havilah, where there was gold, and the gold of that land is good. Bdellium and onyx stone were there. The name of the second river is the Gihon. It is the one that flowed around the whole land of Cush. And the name of the third river is the Tigris, which flows east of Assyria. And the fourth river is the Euphrates. God planted a garden. It's kind of interesting. He didn't have Adam plant the garden. God planted the garden. And he did this in a specific context. It wasn't in Havilah. It wasn't in Cush. It was in Eden. And it says here in verse 8, and there he put the man in a particular place, in a particular piece of real estate, in a specific context that was unlike any other. He put the man in Eden. But the grass always looked greener on the other side of the fence, right? We always want something. If God puts you on a job, something always looks better. And once you get over here to that spot, something always looks better over here. The grass always looks greener. But this is where God put me. This is where he put me. So what's the attitude? Well, God just gave me I just took a job, or God put me here. I just took a job, or God put me here. Jobs can become callings when you realize that somebody else called you to do it. Is it just a job? Or did God actually put you there? Was God behind? Did God orchestrate the coming into your job? Then it's not just a job, but it's also a calling. Embrace the calling. I believe there's a reason for everything. Why am I stuck here? Because I think from the way God acts, this is where God put you. Let me just read you here, Acts 17. It says, God made from one man every nation of mankind to live in all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling places. God can do that on a global scale, and God can do that on a local scale. I believe you are where you are, work-wise, because that's where God has you. That's where God put you. And if that's where he called you to be, then you can treat it like a calling. It's a specific context. So embrace that context by saying, I belong here. This is where my garden is at. I wasn't given your garden. I was given my garden. And the gardens in Eden probably are taken care of a little differently than the gardens in Cush and the gardens of Havilah. I have a garden in Eden, so I got to get to know the context. I got to get to know the local environment. I got to get to know the resources. This is my context. If God wants to move you on, I have found that usually that doesn't happen until you have embraced the context. That means get to know your boss. Get to know your co-workers. Get to know their likes, their dislikes. What's the philosophy of the company? You ought to know that better than anybody. As a Christian, we represent God in a workplace, and you above anybody should embrace that particular context. Get to know everything about your coworkers, your job, your field. Be the best you can be at your specific context. Verse 15. Let me read this here real quick here. This is a good summary of the last 2 points. Verse 15. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to keep it. So do that. Do that. You're put there in a specific place, so embrace your place. So why am I stuck on this job? You're put there for a special purpose. You're put there for a specific place. And you're put there with a rich, rich, rich provision. God provides so greatly for us. Look at verse 16. Verse 16 says, And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, You may surely eat of every tree of the garden. It's interesting, he planted a garden, caused trees to spring up and rivers to flow out. There was a bountiful provision. Adam didn't have to provide any of that himself. God spent the whole week working, took a day of rest with the man, and on the first day of the week, he planted a garden. He put Adam in the garden. But he caused trees to spring up, rivers to flow out, and that is a great picture of the bounty God has placed in your life. God preceded you. He set you on your job. Excuse me. You get something in the back of your throat sometimes. He preceded you. He gave you everything that you needed. And trees spring up and rivers flow out. Okay? There is a bountiful provision for you. The rivers feed the trees feed the people, and the people take care of the land, and there's this nice symbiotic relationship going on. And wherever he puts you, you got to trust the trees will spring up. The rivers will flow out. His provision is rich. Look for the treasures. Look for the trees. Every job, even if you hate that job, has something rich for you. Might be a relationship or a co-worker or some benefits. The pay maybe pays real good. You hate the job, but it pays good. Maybe the flexibility is there so you can do other things in your life. Every context has its unsavory elements. However, there's always trees springing up, always rivers flowing out. Look for that and embrace the provision. There's something God has for you there. Every job has trees and rivers. So embrace those. Embrace those. Embrace the purpose. Embrace the place. Embrace the provision. These are all provided for you. But there's one stipulation here that is kind of a hook in our text. The very last verse, very critical verse. I'd say this. Embrace all those things. Purpose, place, provision. But don't reach. Don't reach. He provides things for us. For oftentimes, I don't think we need to reach. Because we get into some things that really wasn't intended for us. If we have to reach for purpose, it might not belong to you. If you have to reach for your place, maybe look at the place that God has already given you. If you have to reach for provision, it might be outside of God's bounds for the will of your life. All good things have limitations. Let's look at this again here in verse 16, and we'll read it through the end of the passage, verse 17. It says this, God says, you may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. Very critical verse of the Bible to know, but a good for the purpose of our discussion this morning. God has given you things, embrace that, but don't reach beyond the boundary. There are boundaries to every good thing. And people too, people on jobs, they reach too far. People reach for power. People reach for money. People reach for romance. People reach for gossip, for that dirt on somebody else. People reach on jobs. This happens all the time. Don't reach. Embrace what God's given you, but don't go beyond the boundary for your life. As we will soon find out in these passages, the man did reach too far. He did. And this text says, in the day that you eat of that tree, you shall surely, what? Die. This warning is so important for us to understand why Jesus had to come and die on a cross. The man reached too far. He did something that he wasn't supposed to do. He went outside of the boundaries, and he partook of the forbidden fruit. And death entered into the human race. This is the problem that we have, this sin problem. The Bible says the wages of sin is what? Death. That's the consequence. And so since death came into the human race, Jesus had to come and pay a price and to take your place. Because as being children of Adam, we inherited this sinful nature that requires a payment. This payment belongs to you. Each and every one of you today. That's what is hanging over your head. You were born as a son or daughter of Adam on death row. And yet God so loved the world that he gave his own son, that whosoever should believe on him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Jesus came to pay your penalty. You reached too far. And yet he went and died on a tree. You reached for a tree, but he went and died on a tree so that you might have life. Embrace your purpose. Embrace your place. Embrace your provision. But don't reach too far. Don't reach too far. He knows what's best. And even when we do, we still reach too far. We still mess up. We do stuff that, we partake of forbidden fruits. And yet his love is still constant. He still gives Jesus for you. And all we need to do is put our faith in him. So I'm going to have Christina come up. We're going to end on one last song. These topics are very, I find, foundational. It's good to go back to the foundation. This is who we are as a people. This is why we're here. We need to be reminded of these things. And then to be reminded of the grace that precedes us and then sometimes follows us up. And Jesus is certainly good for us in that we are always, I find, reaching too far. So I'm going to ask you to stand and receive the kindness, the goodness that Jesus has to offer, and then tell the Father how much you love him, how much you appreciate him, and what he does for you on a continuing, constant basis.